Here. Perfect timing. Coughing just as I press record. Smashed it. Don't worry. There's post-production things. It was just funny. That was perfect. So I am here with Gerardo, and I'm going to let you pronounce your full name in a second. But you've got a book that you released in late December 2020. So I thought, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us the name of your book, and we can kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Gerardo Urias in Spanish, or Gerardo Urias in English. I grew up in San Diego, so I went to school in San Diego. So I got used to saying Gerardo Urias for people because Gerardo Urias is a bit difficult for some people. So, but I go by both. Yeah.
No pressure at all. And so your book itself, the focal point is psilocybin mushrooms, and it's obviously called Taking Back My Mind, but there's more to it than that. So if you could say the entire book name and sort of, we'll start with that. What kind of made, well, actually, with your entire story, because obviously I've listened to other shows with you, your entire story of how you got to the point of writing a book is so interesting. So if you could tell us what the full name of your book is, and then we'll go to the start of sort of your first experience, we say, with psilocybin mushrooms and how you kind of started that. And we'll kind of go from there. If you could please take us there.
Absolutely, yeah. So my book is called Taking Back My Mind, My Journey Out of Depression with Psilocybin Mushrooms. This is the book right here.
Perfect.
And it revolves around my entire journey from when my life was saved out of severe depression a few years ago. So I was 41 at the time. I hadn't done psychedelics for a long time, but as you mentioned, I was living in Germany when I turned 19. Me and some friends moved to Germany. And that time was the first time that I had psychedelic experiences. The very first time I did mushrooms was when I was 18 in high school. And it's interesting, I've been reflecting back on all these early experiences and how they really did have an effect on me, and sort of just shifted my perspective a bit. Really embedded this love of nature into my heart, and we had some incredible times over there. So that was the very first time, 3 years or so over there of just living the life and just living an absolutely magical life in the Bavarian Alps. I mean, I can't even tell you how perfect it was. And then I came back to the States, and then that's when the psychedelics kind of fell to the wayside, and I didn't do them again until the recent events.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's a very good summary of it. And so I want to ask, when you, we'll kind of jump around a little bit in your sort of timeline of events, but one thing I want to pick up on, because I know we'll get into a more in-depth conversation, I may forget to bring it up, is drinking culture. And that's something which is, in the Western world, drinking is a large part of the main social dynamic of a lot of groups and things. And because it's the main legal drug of the majority of the Western world and things. So when you went to Europe, you obviously doing more drugs and less drinking. And then when drug is a very broad term, but when you moved to the US, obviously you did less. With the drinking element, did you find that the culture of drinking of the places that you visited in Europe was different to that of the US, or were there more sort of similarities?
I was in my early 20s back then, so I was viewing the world through a very different lens and a very magical young lens, so I wasn't looking at the world as I am now, sort of observing things that are wrong with society and how that affects people and how it affects me, things like that. I was just like raging. I was partying. I was doing it all. So it didn't seem like anything was wrong about the drinking culture over there. It's a lot of fun, a lot of fun. But I still did notice a little bit of a difference in the best way I could describe, I guess, is in the U.S. drinking culture is sort of just a little bit darker, more of an escape from daily life, escape from stress. It's a little more abrasive of a thing to do, whereas it seemed in Europe it was very much part of the culture and more lighthearted, more of an enjoyment, celebration as opposed to escape. And I kind of noticed that back then for sure. Now I clearly see that that's a big difference there. In the US, it's a huge escape tool is what it is.
Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it. And I think in England, we've got kind of a mix. When I go to Europe, it's even different for someone who lives in England and things, because over here you do have there's the darker element of things where you go to certain pubs quite early in the morning and there's someone who's there and has been there, who will be there all day by themselves. And I'm not trying to make a judgment on someone's life, but when there's a large group of individuals like that, one has to assume that a certain percentage of them, if they're there all the time and you constantly see them, they may have an issue with drinking. And I'm not trying to pass judgment on anyone like that, but there are obviously the party elements and there's negative elements to those parts as well. And I do find that with the drinking culture in the UK is some of my friends don't drink, not because they've had issues with drinking, just because they don't enjoy the feeling they get when they drink alcohol and whatnot. And there are elements where they ask a lot of questions about it, and it seems to be something that is considered like not necessarily wrong, but do you know what I'm saying there? Where there's judgment. There's judgment if you decide just to be, I just don't drink. There's a lot of the time that kind of interaction. I don't know if you experienced that at all in your life, delving quite personal into your life, if you're willing to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now at this stage, in life, I of course, I notice it so much. Back then, again, I was young and I was enjoying it. I was a part of it. But now, and after I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of analyzing, and a lot of reflecting on my own life and the periods where there was a lot of alcohol, the periods that weren't, and it tends to be when I'm doing psychedelics, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of drinking. It's kind of either or, that's why it works for addiction so well. And it's really difficult because it's such a fabric of society. I have a really hard time with it right now, currently, just to be social and to not drink. It's really hard. Everything revolves around food and drink, of course, even food. I'm very big on nutrition. A lot of my book talks about nutrition and health, and you have to feed yourself optimally to perform optimally. And there's a lot of eating that goes on in gatherings and things like that. It's not necessarily the healthiest food, so it's hard to be social and just eliminate these things that have a really negative effect a lot of times. And alcohol is one of the big ones, It's just such a fabric of our modern society, and especially in the United States, Europe as well, I think most of the modern world. And it's hard to ditch because alcohol has been a part of our existence just as much as the mushrooms and psychedelics have. It's all of humanity. There's been symbiosis with alcohol. We have this attraction to ethanol for some reason. I just read an article that they're theorizing that it may be the need for fermentation of fermented foods, and so that's why it's appealing to us, and that's why it's in our life. So it's hard. It's hard to deal with because it's part of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on a lot of things there, and I agree completely. It is one of those. Is that one of those drugs that transcends time through? There's a lot of evidence to show that a lot of the other drugs that we use, obviously a lot of them were quite young in the last century or so, things like acid in the current form and certain elements like that, and things like cocaine that primarily in the form we know them as have to be made that way, as opposed to, the earlier days of chewing coca leaves and things like that is a way of doing cocaine. But, I'm trying to get out there's certain drugs of the last century that have come together because of the technology to create them. And then there's other ones which have been, mainly grown ones and, sort of air quotes natural ones like cannabis and mushrooms, which have been along for a long time, and fermenting grain essentially and other items to create a juice that you can, or liquid that you can drink. That's gone through across cultures, across the entire world. And with these other drugs, it's peculiar. I understand some of the reasoning why, not to get to the huge political side of things necessarily yet, but I understand that a lot of it is political, and the reason that these drugs are allowed and these drugs aren't allowed completely changes things. So if we go back to your journey, and so if we kick off, you came back from Germany and traveling around Europe, and you had a great time there, and then you went over to, was it California, or was it Mexico at that time?
That was San Diego, California. Yeah, we turned back to San Diego.
Go ahead. So please take us there and tell us as much of your journey as you're willing to share.
Yeah, definitely. That's great because I don't talk about this part of my life much with interviews because obviously we dive deep into the book and psychedelics, things like that. But I've been really thinking a lot about this stuff, and those years were so formative for me. It was the first chapter of my book, and so I do go into it. But though they were just the most insanely magical times of my life. I was just in this snow globe in Bavaria, loving life, everything. I mean, it looked like a snow globe, the most beautiful place on earth. And wake up every day, go skiing, and again, started experimenting with psychedelics, with mushrooms, things like that. And I was very healthy. That's when I really fell in love with skiing, which is another facet of me in my life. Is the more you get to know me, the more you realize all of these other things are hugely important, just like psychedelics. Skiing for me is even better. Like skiing a deep powder day for me is the absolute best thing, medicine in the world, far beyond even psychedelics, far beyond anything at all. And I talk about it in the book. It's because of flow state. It's because of what happens in your body and your brain when you're getting into these sports that you enjoy and that you become better at. So when you get into this flow state, that's the optimal form of existence, really. Even down to the biology of how your brain is functioning. Stephen Kotler is great at his research, the flow state collective research, I believe it's called, and we're uncovering some incredible science, incredible flow science, what we can see in the brain.
100%.
And so I fell in love with skiing, and so I turned into a complete hardcore ski bum for that time that I was in Germany, and then I came back to San Diego, not quite sure what to do. And the reason I left Germany was I was there for 3 years and I was just having a blast. And I was 21, 22, and I was thinking that I should go back to school or something. That I should do something responsible. Right? yeah, that responsibility itch, right? That is just, in hindsight, it was like such a aimless, stupid move. I was living the dream, I don't know why I ever left, but I did. And so I came back to San Diego. I couldn't stay away from the mountains though, so I moved immediately to Utah. So moved to the mountains. I think I was just in San Diego a few months. I moved back with my girlfriend at the time who I met in Germany. And so we started a little life here. Went to Utah, spent a few winters there, and then we moved to Hawaii. So I was bouncing between the mountains in Utah and then Hawaii in the summer. And then eventually ended up back in San Diego after a few years of that. Still with that kind of itch. So I kind of came back here to do the same thing I was doing in Germany, because it was the flow state, My life has kind of been an inadvertent experiment in flow state living, now that I think about it. Because I just haven't been able to stay away from the mountains, from surfing, from nature, from all this stuff. And my life has been just going back to the mountains, leaving, going back to the beach and all that, So that was the next 10 years of my life I spent in Utah, San Diego. In San Diego, once that kind of settled, I started getting into the restaurant business. I started bartending, right? So talking about alcohol, that's where I kind of started getting into the party scene. The exposure to the bar scene and the alcohol scene did what it does, and eventually my relationship, was a very, very wonderful, beautiful relationship, crumbled under the pressure of everything. And then I kind of hit a low point in my life. And then again, I decided I got to get out of here. I got to go back to the mountains. So then I moved to Lake Tahoe. I did a few years in Lake Tahoe. And again, when I'm in the mountains, I'm thriving. When I'm in nature, when I can get to that flow state, it's my medicine. And this was the period that I wasn't doing psychedelics. Mm-hmm. So that was my medicine. I didn't really realize it at the time. I just was going with my gut, my intuition. And I knew I was happy when I'm skiing. I'm happy when I'm surfing, And so that took its course. But the partying and all that just became, I'm working in a restaurant, a bartender, server. So it's a party and it is fun. I was young and you meet a lot of people, I've had several relationships. It was just that life, but it was a lot of drinking, and the drinking kind of got worse and worse. And then eventually I met a girl that I married, met a girl at work, and we ended up getting married. We sort of adopted this kind of nomadic lifestyle that I have always lived, really. And we, shortly after getting married, we were just sick of the grind, Yeah. And that's why we met too. We're both kind of have that personality of like, we don't want the regular life, the regular grind. We both love traveling. Travel is pretty much what brought us together. So we made a plan, and we were like, hey, we had both had good jobs, and we're like, let's save our money and just hit the road, get out of here, sell everything. And that's what we did. Made a plan, sold everything here, took off to Panama to start a business, ended up the next 4 years, traveling throughout Central America and Mexico and trying different businesses. Started kind of a tour business and was trying to do like adventure tours down there. Ended up in Mexico, doing a vacation rental business. Was very good, very lucrative, and it was kind of like I had found how to live the life that I love living. Right, the 4-hour work week. That's kind of that book from Tim Ferriss sparked that idea. And that actually led to that whole move. And so I thought, yes, we achieved the 4-hour work week, had it made. And then at that point, I'm at the top, on top of the world. I had everything, living a few blocks from the Caribbean. And life was just perfect. And then that's when everything fell apart. And then that's where the book takes over.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that's very eloquently put. Again, life, I guess life is just always kind of teaching people lessons in some very unpleasant way a lot of the times. And I know obviously where the story is about to go from here, I want to chime in and say I have actually somewhat had a similar experience because I lost my dad. I actually lost him nearly 10 years ago now. And so the experience of going through that and then how my relationship with psychedelics and other things in my life shifted quite heavily in a variety of different ways I didn't actually expect. And so I've been very open about it on the podcast. I've done whole episodes about it and talking to other individuals. And it's always something which whenever people, and obviously you in other podcasts I've heard have spoken about it. And whenever people speak about the death of a loved one, it's always something that I think I would never push anyone into. But obviously when people are willing to speak about it, I think it's such an important thing because unfortunately everyone's going to go through it at some point and everyone processes it slightly differently. And I think we can learn various lessons from each other. And your journey in particular, linking in with the book as well, I think is one that people would very much benefit from hearing. So if you want to take us through now from where you just left off in your story and where the story goes, with obviously me somewhat spoiling it, but going into as much as you're willing to discuss once again, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I took you to after getting married, after achieving everything. So I'm living in Mexico, in Playa del Carmen. We have our business automated, and everything's going really smooth. My 40th birthday, my wife and a best friend from high school planned a Europe trip to go back to the place we used to live, 20 years ago that I was just telling you about. And so they planned this epic surprise ski trip for me and him to go and just go ski the old mountains, hit the old spots. And so we did that, and it was epic. It was so amazing going down memory lane for 2 weeks in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, it's called, in southern Bavaria. And it was just like, especially those 2 weeks, I was so on top of the world. I just thought, wow, I'm living on the beach in Mexico, this beautiful wife. Business is great. I'm skiing in the Alps with my best friend in the place that I used to live, and just, it was surreal. It was absolutely surreal, And so that happened, and we had a great time, and everything was awesome. And immediately when I got back to Cancun, though, back home, issues started, and I noticed that something was off with the marriage, like really off. Mm-hmm. And so it became very apparent that there was an issue, and, things took its course. And within 1 day, within 1 day we got in a fight. And, just to sum up, like what happened is, I was unaware of the wrath of the ego. This is kind of what my life is all about now, what the book is all about, and I discovered my ego. And my ego was in complete control of our life. And so was hers. And we both had strong egos. We both grew up with challenges, and very similar challenges too. She was half Mexican. I'm full Mexican, but very much, we had a lot in common that way. So we had a lot of challenges, and they come out in ego, And so it was a battle of the egos, and it just got to a breaking point. So it was very abrupt. Within a few days, she was out of the apartment. And so then I was all of a sudden just from top of the world, in Europe, skiing all over the place and just living life, to coming back home and then empty apartment, not sure what to do. So then that's where everything tanked. That's where my mental health really started tanking, and I was lost, totally lost. I had no idea what to do. I really didn't see it coming, And so I decided to go home for a little bit and go hang out with my brother. My brother and I have always been very close. And so I did that, went home, and then 2 days after I got there, my sister called and my dad had a stroke, and it was a pretty bad one. And so I'm, trying to figure out what to do. And then now we have this, and he ended up passing away 2 weeks later. And so those 2 weeks I was dealing with those two things, And then a health issue, the same weeks that I realized I was going deaf. I had this condition that progressed slowly, so I didn't really notice it for quite a while. It was progressing for a few years, but I was really close to deaf by the time I went to get checked out by the doctor, and that was during these few weeks. And so everything happens in threes, and it just rained on me. Life really just took a big shitstorm on me, and so I couldn't handle it. I lost it, And so I suffered immensely for the next 10 months. Suffered immensely and just couldn't find the purpose in life. I couldn't find why to continue. If I just had everything that I've ever really dreamed of, and it all can vanish just like that, I was thinking, well, what's the point? What's the point to put so much effort? There was my life's work to get to where I was. And so I thought, what's the point in all this effort? It can just crumble again, And so that's where I was, and there was no getting out of that. And then it was just downhill. And the loops and the thought patterns and the ruminations just got worse and worse. And eventually I started having suicidal ideations. And yeah, I just didn't want to live anymore. And it was, I went to the hospital several times. I had panic attacks, I had things like that. I ended up in jail because of an incident with alcohol. During this time as well, I was drinking quite a bit because it was just too much to handle.
Yeah.
And it was just the classic steps, down the rabbit hole of depression and mental health. So after the jail incident, my brother, a few days after that, he suggested I try magic mushrooms. And though I had heard about that and heard about the application of psychedelics for mental health, I started reading about that, so I was aware of it, but I just didn't put two and two together. I didn't think it would work. I just kind of did it just because I was really low with motivation these days. I didn't care about anything, So he said, "Hey, want to try this?" I said, "Sure, let's try it." So he came over with some mushrooms on December 22nd, 2017. That day changed everything. In the morning we ate a few mushrooms and took a walk on the beach, and that is what happened. That right there, that beach walk fixed everything. With about and not even, I say 24 hours because that's what it is. And in actuality, it's just a complete shift of everything. So I'm still on this journey, and I will be forever, But I would say that within an hour of eating those mushrooms, the feeling of dread and that feeling of not wanting to live and the feeling of just utter loneliness and sadness, that literally dissipated, just kind of dissolved, and got filled in with euphoria, with that mushroom euphoria that I hadn't had in 20 years, But my body remembered it. It remembered it, and it felt really good. And I thought, whoa, I remember this feeling. And I thought, oh man, this feels good. I felt good for the first time, and I had given up on feeling good. It wasn't. I had accepted that I was never going to feel joy again. And so all of a sudden that's gone, and this euphoria, physical euphoria, just floods me. And then it got, over the next hour, it got stronger and stronger, and then everything was gone except what was happening now. And we were on the beach. It was a beautiful day. It just turned into the most magical beach day, and we had an amazing magical day. Did that, went to sleep. The next morning, woke up, felt good. Wasn't sure what to expect. Sort of walked around the next few days, kind of apprehensive, is it coming back? And after a few days, I realized, it was gone. And I was like, wow, I can't believe it. And so I started researching it. I started journaling. Philosophy is another aspect of the book that entered my life right then and there, just perfectly. Everything comes in threes. I had psychedelics, this breathing technique that I talk a lot about in the book, and philosophy. These are the three pillars of my book. And these three things entered my life in the same week. And so I started journaling and writing and researching, writing notes, and that journal, those notes turned into my book. And so that's what this is a collection of how I put everything together, and so I could use it myself. So it's my own guide, everything I learned on how to methodically use all this stuff and how to piece it all together. And when I realized what I had, I thought, okay, I can turn this into a book. And that's that's the story of the book.
It's perfect. And I mean, there's so many elements that I want to pick up on there, including some things I heard you speak about on other podcasts. But just while I'm remembering it is the breathing exercise. You mentioned Wim Hof in your book.
Right.
And it's very interesting because when I read sort of part of your book, in the last week or two at work, it just got mentioned again about Wim Hof out of nowhere. And I was like, oh yeah, Wim, because I've known about him previously due to other podcasts and obviously the many world record attempts and crazy stuff that he's got up to. And so it's weird that I was like, oh yeah, breathing exercises. And I do meditation myself, but I do the very low key, just breathing exercise, watch my breath sort of thing. I do that pretty much every night to help me sleep. And I do it sometimes at work if I'm stressed. But breathing is something that is so heavily underrated in such a bizarre way, and how it can have such an effect on someone. Like if I've had it before where partners or friends of mine have had started to have panic attacks or anxiety issues, and if you can get their breathing regulated, you can change how they are feeling and how their bodies are interpreting things. So please tell us a little bit about the breathing method, and if you had known about, obviously you said you kind of came across it in this amazing sort of week. So please tell us about some of the breathing method.
Yeah, it is a huge part of my life, a huge part of my book, and it's called the Wim Hof method, the technique that popped into my life, and that's a really cool, beautiful story that I include in the book too. This guy that I just met online that helped me out during these months, that he really just talks to me and helped me during some pretty dark moments, and he kind of became my little mentor. And he's the one who suggested it after talking to him for a few months. He would help, but I just couldn't get out of the slump, And so he said, you know what? He kept talking about presence, about achieving presence and being, paying attention to your breath and connecting with your breath and all that. So I understood the concept, but I just wasn't able to do it. And so that's when he sent me the video to Wim Hof, and he said, hey, try this. This is a technique that can help in getting you out of your head. And, it's so mystical how this all happened. It's kind of detailed. I won't go into all the details, but, I've never met this guy, first of all. I've never met him. He just popped up on my computer, said all the right things at the right times, introduced me to this breathing technique, and then I still haven't met him, just amazing. Yeah. And so I opened up the app that he sent. I tried it out and I felt really good. I felt kind of that little buzz, and I thought, ooh, that was about a week before the mushroom journey. So that was actually the first thing that started shifting something in my mind. Yeah. That was the first thing, the very first feeling that was different from just total sadness. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool, And so I did it a few times throughout that week. And I felt good. And I absolutely knew I was on to something there, but I was still very low motivation. I was still just kind of half-assing it. I wasn't really putting 100% into the breathing technique, And then a week later, when my brother and I ate the mushrooms and I felt really good, I remembered the breathing technique and I tried it. And I thought, hey, there's that breathing technique. I'm going to try that. And I did it. And it just, it took me out into... So I've done a lot of research on this now and into DMT realm, So this breathing technique induces DMT, which we all mammals make DMT.
Dimethyltryptamine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know a small amount about it.
Oh, man. I'm fascinated by it. I am writing a second book, a follow-up book to Taking Back My Mind. And this is going to revolve around DMT and around the lessons I've learned lately. I am filming a documentary about this too. I was just down in Mexico at a DMT retreat and had the most wild experience and filmed it all. It's going to be just mind blowing. Oh man. Yeah. DMT is huge. It's a big part of my life now. So I've been researching a lot, and so I kind of got into that realm because there's a very powerful synergy that occurs when you're doing the breath work and you're on psilocybin. I firmly believe that it releases DMT because of that synergy. I don't think we have the science right now to prove that specific, combination. I would love to see that though, and it's kind of my goal. So I felt, yeah, it's just an incredible feeling. And so since then, I was really hooked, and I realized the power that it had. So I did the breathwork quite a few times. I showed my brother. We both did it on the beach on the sand, just a beautiful setting. It's the best place to do breathwork is at the beach with the sound of the waves, and you just get lost in breath. It's so powerful and magical. And that day we did it a few times. The next day I started doing it, and then I just started doing it every day. And really, well, after that, I wasn't depressed anymore. So I had motivation and I had a lot of energy, and I would give it 100%. And I went deep with it, and it immediately started really activating all these systems that I now feel like because I really haven't missed too many days in the last 4 years of the breathwork. It was that powerful that I became immediately committed to just that was the new routine, and then I developed a routine where first thing in the morning, I roll out the yoga mat and then do a little bit of yoga meditation, do this breath work, and then jump in the ocean or a nice cold bath. And then you're feeling like $1,000,000, it's just incredible. And you do that every day. And then your baseline of how you feel starts to raise because you feel good all the time. And then life just keeps getting better and better, and so that's what the breath work offers is, there's so much I could say about the breathwork. I mean, it's so detailed, and there's so much, and new science as well is emerging every day. Just as far as health, and that's one of the big messages in my book is the psychedelics are extremely powerful and they are life-changing. Breath is as well, and breath is accessible. Breath is not illegal, not yet. Not until they figure out a way to monetize air, but it's. Every single person has access to this state, which is the same. I can get to a very psychedelic state through breathwork alone. So, it has the potential of altering your mind as well. Breath has the potential to do everything that psychedelics do, and it's kind of where it leads you. That's where it's led me. It's where it leads most people. If you look back at the history of psychedelics, and Richard Alpert, who was the professor at Harvard, Timothy Leary's partner in crime, he moved to India and changed his name to Ram Dass. So these things are extremely powerful, and he started doing yoga, meditation, and that's the route it leads you. Kind of opens up the door to realize the power of breathwork and yoga meditation. And all of these modalities have been intertwined throughout history. The history of yoga is intertwined with the history of psychedelics, So it's one and the same, really. It's different means to the same end, I believe.
Yeah, and they both link with enlightenment as well. And the history of, well, when you add in breathing as well into those things, you've got so many elements of life that it's about perception, but it's about kind of with this. So I was thinking about one of the other podcasts you did where you're speaking about your peripherals and things when you are on the beach. So I was thinking about that while also thinking about the breathing and what they all combine into in the yoga and your skiing and the flow state and everything is basically shutting off what I would describe as the static of the rest of the world in a variety of different ways. Skiing is a very intense, focused, like you need to be in the moment here. It's kind of somewhat forcing you in a positive way, but it's like a lot of more extreme sports and things. I've done skydiving before, and that's the kind of thing where it's like, you're in this moment, you have to be. And that's like a very different kind of flow state and a different kind of intunement and just kind of putting the blinkers on, like horses have, where you just tune out everything. You hyper focus on your present, your moment. You're not worrying about the past. You're not worrying about what's happening in 20 minutes in the future. You are purely focused on the now. I think a lot of the elements that you've been speaking about, from the breath to the skiing to yoga and a lot of the other parts, they all culminate into that just needing to tune out the rest of the world, regardless of what part of your life you're in and if it's positive or negative. You need that space to just look introspectively, and drugs and exercise and breathing are all different ways in which one can look inward instead of consuming everything from the outside world in the same way.
Yes, absolutely. 100% correct. Yeah, definitely. And, to elaborate a bit more on that, our brain is wired to look for trouble, to look for problems. It's not wired to make us just feel wonderful all the time. If that was the case, we wouldn't have made it very far in evolution. So you can't quite be in this blissful state 100% of the time. We have to survive. So our brain is wired that way. In our modern day and age, we're not normally, and I think most of the population, under any kind of physical threat. Our nervous system and our brain, however, believe that we are. Our nervous system can't see what's happening, so our nervous system depends on our senses, on our eyes, on our ears, on our intuition, to translate what's going on in the outside world, and so that the nervous system can act accordingly, whether we're in danger and we stimulate our fight or flight, or whether we're safe and we pursue eating and digesting and love and procreating, things like that. So what's happened in this modern era is that our nervous system still kind of feels like we need to run from a tiger. That's not quite the case. And so this is the case of anxiety. This is the case of chronic stress and anxiety that we live with today. And that's normal. It's normal because of the brain and what it's meant to do. All of these modalities and everything I've jumped into and have researched, and how I try and live my life now, is to use the knowledge that we have, the biology and the physical tools that we have, to counteract what the nervous system is doing. So we do have a choice. We used to kind of think that our sympathetic and parasympathetic, that nervous system that reacts when we're in danger or not, we used to believe it was autonomous, that it just kind of kicks in and we don't really have a choice in the matter. But we're discovering through science now that we do. And so we can deliberately reverse that system. Through the breathwork, we can induce a parasympathetic state. We can induce a relaxation state. Through cold exposure, we can do the same. Through breathing, through simply focusing your eyes, as you mentioned in my other podcast, where I was talking about how your eyes work, and if you can take in more of your peripheral, that signals to your brain that you're okay, because it's kind of like you're on the mountaintop looking out and there's no danger. You can see everything, so you feel safe. So your eyes, you can actually deliberately do that, and they've seen in brain scans that reduces activity in the amygdala, which processes fear and emotion. That's kind of your fear center of your brain. So they've seen a reduction in activity there by adjusting your eyes. So you learn all these tools, and then we have to counteract it, because if we don't, our default is going to be stress and anxiety, and that's what we're seeing in the world today. So I'm trying to, teach people and empower people and teach them that we have immense power within us to do this. And that's what I do, and that's what I teach. And I teach workshops on how to do this. And then you can live a pretty awesome stress-free life, even in the midst of stress. I mean, these times are very stressful. These 2 years have been the absolute most difficult of my life, just like everybody else. It's I'm not on some roller coaster ride here that's everything's easy. It's extremely difficult. I can't tell you how challenging it's been, but I do these things every day, and so they counteract it, and I still feel very happy, great, and generally stress-free. So we have the ability to do that.
And one of the ways in which I think you described on yet another podcast, I'm just sneaping bits that I like from all the different ones, is I think you described it as sort of the color came back in a way, in one of the sort of metaphors or ways you explained sort of the before the experience on the beach and the after. I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, just to explain how you're sort of feeling. I just liked hearing the way you described it when I heard you another time.
Yeah, that day that we ate the mushrooms, that was the day where everything really changed, right? Even though it wasn't that strong of a mushroom journey, so we were out on the beach, so we could obviously function, we could walk, and it wasn't a ego dissolving journey or anything like that, but it was strong enough, and it was strong enough for the euphoria to take effect and to enhance colors. So the first thing I noticed were the enhancement of colors, that the beach was really bright blue, just incredibly blue, that I hadn't really seen in a while. And I kind of started thinking about it and just going into what was going on. And at that moment, I just kind of realized, hey, ocean, I had been looking at the ocean every day because I was staying in my sister's apartment, which was right across the street from the ocean. So I saw the ocean every day, but it just kind of turned gray. And it's hard to describe, but I just started kind of shutting everything out of my world, really. And that was one of the things, is the beach in general, because I love the beach and I grew up on this beach and I grew up surfing and bodyboarding, all kinds of water sports, and I love it. But I never went in the water. It just became this body of water and then just kind of became gray. And I noticed the intense color enhancement all of a sudden, and I just couldn't believe it. I was blown away at that. And I thought, okay, something happened. This isn't the world that I have been looking at, at all. And I thought, okay, well, the mushrooms, they do that. I know they enhance color, so that's what's going on. But am I going to go back to that other vision that I just had a few hours ago? Because it was definitely different. And that was just kind of what I was wondering. We went about the rest of the day and it was wonderful, the most beautiful sunset you can imagine, and some other things that happened. But the world stayed bright. I remember specifically the next day looking out at the ocean and looking and being really happy, like, wow, it's blue, it's still bright blue. And it just stayed that way. And so the color came back to me. And somehow I had lost some color vision. And so I cross-analyzed this with a case study that I have in the book for somebody who practices the Wim Hof method. He's bipolar, and he treats and manages his bipolar with the Wim Hof method alone, with breathwork and cold exposure. He manages ups and downs and all of that. And when I was speaking to him, he told me that the same thing happened to him. He had lost color vision for, I believe, quite a few years during his bipolar before he discovered the Wim Hof method. And then the first time that he had a major breakthrough with the Wim Hof method, with the breathing technique, and I believe with the ice cold water as well, he suddenly, it was just as abrupt as with me, suddenly regained his color. And he was so astonished that he told his family, ran downstairs and told his family, I can see color, and they didn't know what was going on. So they thought he was kind of going a little crazy or something, but but that is exactly what happened with me. And so his color returned, and then it's been that way ever since. So I included him in the book just to sort of highlight, there's something that happens in the visual cortex sometimes in cases of depression, bipolar, and something having to do with color and color vision.
Almost like cataracts for the soul. It's just like you lose the color of everything around you. It can be, I can see how that could affect someone. And thank you for sharing that, and obviously all the other sort of things that you've spoken about. And specifically with the book then, obviously you had these experiences, and what was the catalyst? What's the thing that made you, after having these experiences, think, okay, now I need to find a way to share this with the world? Because now you're on track, and obviously you've got your second book that you're working on and documentary. It's going to be very exciting. But the first thing, most people aren't authors, and I'm very intrigued by people's reasoning for deciding to write a book. And obviously yours is about your transformative journey and trying to help people. So I'm very intrigued by, what kind of tweaked and what made you decide, I want to do this?
Yeah, well, it was such a profound life-saving experience, that I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that in one day, this depression and the whole life problem that I had, I had a big problem with life, and that problem just went away. So I was so blown away. I knew, and I was aware that there's a mental health epidemic going on in the world. There's a lot of depressed people. There's a lot of people that need help, And so for me, it was obvious that I had to share this somehow, first of all, at least just talk to people about it. And, I wanted to help others who were where I was. And so that's what started it all, pretty much. And, as I mentioned, I was journaling and I was taking notes and doing a lot of research because I was just very intrigued in how this is even possible. And I just started writing, and I decided really quickly, within 2 weeks, 3 weeks probably, I decided that I wanted to write a book, and I wasn't sure how to do it. I didn't know any authors. I'd never thought about being an author. I had no idea how to do it, but I knew that I just had to share it, and I knew that I could write my story and somebody would read it, And so I just started writing. Yeah, I pieced it together, just slowly figuring out, by mistakes, making lots of mistakes, and And it took about 2 years. And I started, I wanted to document what was happening as well in real time as it was happening, because I was just had this magical day. And so I knew that I was on to something extremely valuable, and that this was a journey, and that I had a new future, and I had a lot of things to learn and a whole life to develop. And so I knew it was going to be an evolution into a different direction, whatever that was. It wasn't quite spiritual right away, although I knew that that's kind of where it was going probably. So I wanted to document it as it was happening in real time. And so that's why I started journaling, to capture these emotions. And also I remember thinking, like a few months into writing the book, I remember feeling so great, and really every day I felt better and better. I started microdosing to get off the antidepressants I was on, and that made me feel really good. And I did that for a few months, and I just started getting like healthier physically, and I was skiing a lot, so I was getting in good shape, and everything was getting better and better. Magical. It was almost that feeling of the magic that I lived in Bavaria in Germany back 20 years ago, because I was living in Lake Tahoe again, skiing and microdosing, and it was just so incredible, just so incredible. And yeah, that's where that went. And that was a little tangent. I lost the question you originally asked.
Fine. That's completely fine. It was more just like you did answer it. It was more specifically like what made you start the book. So bouncing like specifically
just to help people, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so you did explain it amicably, so it's completely fine. Yeah. And I want to add to that. And so now that you're writing your second book, what have you changed the process in which that you're writing with? Like I know some authors were like, I need to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day, and others are like, when inspiration strikes. With this second book, how are you doing it, and what have you kind of learned from the first book?
Yeah, so much. I've still been documenting everything that we're doing, and so this book was very researched. This book was, it was 4 years ago, so it wasn't completely out there yet. So I really felt like I had to sort of prove my theories and my hypotheses and things like that. So there's quite a bit of science in this book. And it turned out excellent, just as I wanted it. But now it's kind of out in mainstream, and you could find a lot of articles in it now. So this next book, while it is going to be researched, of course, and it's going to revolve around DMT, because that's the molecule that I have been experimenting with lately. So I want it to be more of my personal creative side, though. So while it will be research, this is going to be more of my experiences over the last 2-3 years, and my experiences, specifically with DMT and the ever-evolving breathwork, things like that. So I'm going to tap more into my creative side for this. So it'll be kind of a sequel. It'll be the follow-up, but more personal and deeper, because DMT is really next level. It's pretty intense. So the lessons I have learned and the experience that I had was really deep. So I'm gonna try and tap into that realm of just the existentialism and the big questions that are sort of answered during these experiences, and then try and make that more creative.
And you're planning on releasing, or the ideal goal is to have the book ready around the time that the documentary you're creating ready at the same time, and kind of have them as a multimedia project. Right.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, because I've been working on the documentary for a few years. A few months after the mushroom journey, I made it eventually down to Mexico, to Oaxaca, where I started filming. And so, I started that like 3 years ago. And then recently I was just down again. So it's been about a 3-year documentation of the journey. And that's, I've also been working on the concept of the second book, because the idea was sparked in Mexico during the DMT retreat a few months ago. So that's where it was sparked. And as that revolves around that experience, then they're both kind of coinciding with this whole Mexico DMT thing.
That's amazing. And like I know about DMT to a degree, and I've always been intrigued by it. one element of it specifically, like I know this is going to go down to somewhat of a rabbit hole, but with DMT, something that's always intrigued me is ego death. Is that something, obviously, if it's going to spoil the book or the documentary, then don't necessarily give me the spoilers, but with ego death, is that part of your intrigue into DMT or your influence into what draws you there, or just anything about either ego death or what the kind of thing about DMT draws you specifically?
Ever since I started the breathwork, I've been interested in DMT. So I've been really interested in it since the beginning of all of this, of the whole journey. I've really have dove deep into the breathwork and how it works and all that. And so that's what really captured my interest. So it's been quite a few years. I didn't really experience exogenous DMT. I didn't, the Bufo or 5-MeO DMT, I didn't do that until recently. And so, but since I had felt endogenous DMT through the breathwork, it was a familiar feeling. So for me, it was sort of an experiment to kind of prove to myself, that we do induce DMT, to see what it feels like, because it's a very strong feeling with the breathwork. And so I wanted to compare the first time I smoked Bufo, which is the toad, the Bufo alvarius toad of northwest or northeast Mexico and southwest US. So it has a poison on its skin, and then you dry the poison and smoke that. That's 5-MeO DMT. And so the first time I did that, it was a very intensive course, but it was a familiar feeling. And for me, that time that I did that, now that was about a year and a half ago, I believe. That was in Tijuana, in Mexico, actually. DMT is legal in Mexico, by the way. A lot of people don't know that, yeah. So DMT is not a controlled substance down there. But that feeling was very apparent. It was the same feeling of the breathwork, just times 1,000. And so for me, it was kind of proving that hypothesis. Because science right now hasn't really done that with humans. We've seen in rats that they produce DMT when at the time of death, when they die, and that's what they believe happens to all mammals. That's what they believe happens to us. The experience itself is a feeling of sort of death, of, as we mentioned, ego death, but it's more than that. I mean, it's physical death. It's unification with the infinite, unification with consciousness, and merging with the one consciousness, So the whole death birth cycle is something that has intrigued me as well throughout this whole journey, and as it should. This path and the questions that arise when you stumble across mushrooms and things like this are the big questions in life that we don't really pay too much attention to in modern day. Just the thought of why we're here, of the nature of reality, of what the universe is. These questions that seem to not be important anymore in modern society, but they are important. And so this is the realm that you go into, and inevitably you will start thinking a lot about death and life. And so I believe that's also just the natural evolution of the spiritual path. Of course, as we age and get closer to that point, you're going to think about it more, and it becomes very fascinating. And I think that's one of the reasons, definitely, that I'm so intrigued by DMT currently. Is it's a very important molecule. It's a very important part of this death-life cycle, and it's so deep and interesting and powerful, and that it's never ending. I mean, it's when you get into that realm of what is reality and what is death, what is life, I believe it's just an infinite, ever increasing body of knowledge that we acquire, and it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the blurred lines of reality, and when one takes certain psychedelic substances, what you feel is this meat vessel of this physical being that you class as you, compared to what everything else is, the other, of the air or the ground or whatever. Depending on what psychoactive substances one takes, depends on to what degree you feel it's almost like when you have a drawing, and like the lines that change from the color of something to something else, you've normally got standard a black line that splits those, and it's almost like taking those away and having that, almost, if you envision your own body, like having the lines of it that kind of keep it in amongst what you kind of feel and control. And when you take certain substances, it just kind of takes those lines away. So you kind of feed into it, be it, with things like mushrooms or psilocybin with truffles and etc. When you get the breathing element of it, where not just the breathing method you've described, but where everything feels like it's breathing. It's like, it's the experience that, you know, I have gone through in the past. And it's one of those I have pondered with, like fungi and fungi, is the core reason why life is on Earth. It's, you know, when you delve into the very deep diving into, you know, mycelium and how it's like used as a connective network for plants and things to communicate on, and how it's like spores of fungi. I always swap between fungi and fungi because several people say it differently. I can never figure out which one, but, how important they were for spreading nutrients and allowing trees to like swap nutrients and all these kind of elements that we don't even understand of how important fungi is, and how if a human consumes certain ones, it can be nutritious, it can be deadly, but also with ones with psilocybin in, it can completely change one's own perspective of life. And my theory in some ways is maybe if psilocybin is there just to be good and helped and useful in all those ways, when one takes it, it makes you connect with everyone around you and experience love in a more intense way and make you want to be better. And like this experience of yours, obviously it was a combination of things, but the psilocybin was definitely an aspect of that, and how that has, as your sort of book says, how that completely changed your life. And maybe it's the fungi itself down to its core, just trying to improve life on Earth in a really simplistic way of thinking about it. And maybe that's why one feels that way, obviously in a less scientific way. But, yeah, I just think that what you've been saying and all this and all the experiences that you shared have been incredibly important for people to hear, and that especially with your openness with your experiences with these substances, I want to thank you for those.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right about that. You know, the mushrooms are sort of the agents of change. They are what transform death into life. That's their job. That's their mission. It's transformation. And, you know, coincidentally, we have these receptors in our bodies that are like a lock and key for not only psilocybin, but ayahuasca, you know, the bufo toad, so many different molecules from nature that provide us these tools for change. And I believe the same thing, that perhaps this is what's needed right now to infiltrate, you know, the mushrooms kind of need to infiltrate the human mind and reduce the egoic thinking, because it seems to me that the problems in the world are just a manifestation of egoic thinking, of focusing on individual and not the collective, you know, and that's gotten us into quite a bit of trouble in a lot of areas, and that's precisely what they do, you know. They and you know, another very important message that I'm trying to portray with this book is that a lot of times people, you feel like you're stuck, you know, you feel like you're in a situation, or like as I was depressed and I couldn't get out of that. You know, I can change that. And using these agents of change, you know, I'm showing that it's very possible. And that's actually, I remembered what when I went off on that tangent earlier, I remember what I was going to say, that a few months into writing the book, I thought that I need to write down the darkness, because I was still having kind of nightmares and I was still that person. I remembered the memories. I remember the emotions of being depressed, right? But it was dissipating so fast. I was changing so rapidly that I was thinking, I need to jot this down. I need to jot down my feelings of this emptiness that sometimes comes and goes, because it's going to be gone soon, and I'm not going to be that depressed person anymore. And if I'm not that depressed person anymore, how am I going to write a book about depression? You know? And I literally had to do that. I had to write, you know, one of the reasons I started writing the book so early, to write down the thoughts of that person, because I couldn't do it now. I'm not that person anymore. I can't even step into the shoes of that depression, you know. So you literally can change as a person who you are, even insofar as a personality, you know. If you think that people are just the way they are, that's not true at all. We can change our personalities by using all of these modalities, you know. I don't think people realize how powerful that is, you know, sometimes.
Yeah, that's the power of introspection, with or without sort of psychoactive drugs, with the breathing method, any of sort of the tools that you've elaborated on in this conversation. You can use any one of those to assist you in introspection and then finding your way better, being I almost got away with not coughing the whole time. I knew I said at the start I've got a cold or a cough, and I was so close to getting to the end of the podcast without saying it. So sorry, listeners.
I got mine over. That's why I got mine over with at the beginning.
But I agree with you completely. Like all the things that you've explained that people can use to help transform their life, and the path that you've now chosen to go on is a very selfless one, and it's also a very honest one. And I think more people need to hear about it. And I could sit here and talk to you about various psychoactive substances and all kinds of things literally all night, because it's the two things that intrigue me a huge amount are religion and drugs. They're two key things that I find very intriguing. Spirituality / religion, and drugs, on the sense of they're kind of the polar opposites. One is kind of looking outward for answers, and one's looking inward. And I'm just very intrigued by the various different kind of the very minor differences between certain religions and the major ones, and same with different drugs and where they come from and all kinds of things. I could talk about it for hours. Lots of documentaries I'm very intrigued by. So I'll have to have you back on the show, because I could hear with the passion with DMT, like I could just have a whole conversation on the spirit molecule and etc. So, open invitation, and it's recorded. So it's out there. It's going to be out there on the internet for me. And so you'll definitely be able to come on the show again, be it if you just want to come on and talk about a specific thing, or if you want to, when your next book and documentary and things are more ready, you're more than welcome to come on again. But before we just close off this conversation, please, is there any sort of final statements you want to tell people? And then after that, we'll get into sort of plugging and links and etc. So just anything, last sort of word you want to tell people?
Yeah. My main message overall, as simply as I could put it, is that we are in a little bit of a pickle, when it comes to humanity and evolution. And there's things that we can do. It's hard to solve the big problems in the world. It's hard to tackle everything and take everything on. But to act, globally, you have to act locally. To solve the world problems, you have to have locally. And what we have that we can do is, as you mentioned earlier, is look inwards, to see what it is that you can do to elevate yourself. If in theory, if everybody in the world did that, just kind of chose one thing to improve about themselves, or just got a little bit healthier with breathwork, it would have a chain reaction. It would have a trickle effect where you start elevating people around you. And, that undeniable truth that we feel very deeply to our core during a psychedelic experience is that everything's connected. That we are all connected. We are all one. We are one, and you feel that. And so you're going to affect everybody around you. And so my message is just, see what it is that jives with you as far as getting to these states, these altered states, or just getting to know your consciousness, getting a little bit healthier. But looking inward is going to eventually translate into helping outward, So we have everything, and we have all of these. That's what the book's about. All of these extremely powerful tools to do that, to elevate yourself beyond your wild. I'm just talking about just little tiny improvements, but what I'm working on is beyond the wildest dreams I've ever had. So we have the potential to go so far beyond what you even think is possible, and that's what I try and spread.
That's perfect. That's absolutely wonderful. So I'll make sure I include links in the description for any your website, book, all those sorts of elements, social media, and etc. But please tell people where they can find you. And I will just add here, I'll include a link to the UK and US Amazon as well, because on there people can check out several pages of your book as well. And I really recommend people check that out and have a read through just to get a taste of it. And then obviously pick up the book, definitely want to do that. But at the very least, if you can listen to this and you enjoyed this conversation, at the very least, follow on social media and then check out the parts of the book for free. So please, Gerardo, tell everyone all the links and everything that you want to tell them, and I'll make sure they're in the description as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. My website is the title of the book, takingbackmymind.com. So the book is Taking Back My Mind. So just go to takingbackmymind.com, and I have all the social icons there. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, all those. You can pick your favorite social right there from the website. I have a blog on there. This podcast will be on the podcast page on there.
Thank you.
I do breathwork workshops and retreats that I'm working on. I will have an events page there soon too. In San Diego, I'm currently doing breathwork workshops, and then I'm going to be co-hosting a I've developed this workshop called Ascension, where it's a combination of psilocybin, so microdosing psilocybin with breathwork and meditation and yoga and an ice plunge. And it's been an incredible success, and I love doing it. So I'm doing it in San Diego, and so I'm going to bring this workshop to Yosemite to co-host a retreat up there. That's happening in a few weeks. If anybody's interested, that will be on the website as well. And that's where you can find everything about me, takingbackmymind.com.
That's wonderful. And I will say
the documentary will be on there as well.
Oh, perfect. Well, people can keep up to date with that. And I will say they need to check out the merch store on there, because the little mushroom icon you've got and some of the merch you've got, the caps, beanies, long sleeve tops and t-shirts and hoodies as well, I think. I loved them. I went through them. As like, at the moment, I'm in the midst of buying a house and things. So I'm just like, we went and signed a contract today before this conversation, actually. So hopefully everything is going to be sorted in a week or so. But I was like, because my girlfriend, Megan, she's really into, mushroom things now. She's not done any psychedelics yet. She hasn't done any, but she's just very interested by it. She used to pick them. She's half Italian, so her dad and her used to pick them when they were younger, and or when she was younger, and just cook them and eat them. And she's there's a lot of things that she likes at the moment, which have got like little mushroom earrings and that sort of stuff. And I saw yours and I was like, I love those. There's lots of cool little, I'm not going to just say them all, but people need to check out your merch store as well as, everything else you've mentioned, because I really, really liked the merch, and I've bookmarked it to make sure I do pick one of those up, because they are very cool, and it works in a way that now the best kind of merchandise is stuff that even if you don't know the brand, is still a cool enough thing to wear. Right. Regardless. And you've nailed it, where it's like brand and also it looks cool regardless. So I want to commend you on that as well, your merchandise.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, because I forget about that a lot of times. There's so many facets to what I'm doing. I'm doing the retreats and doing the documentary and the book and this and that, doing these podcasts. And I forget that I started a merch line. And yes, thank you so much, because I do like them. They are cool. They're funny. They're putting out a good message, and they help fund everything I'm doing. So please, if you want to help me develop the things that I'm trying to develop, I'm trying to open a psychedelic healing retreat in Mexico by next year. So that's what I'm going to do in a few months here. So all the merch, shirts, hats, all that stuff, all the proceeds for everything that I sell and do, everything goes back into these projects, to the second book and the documentary and the retreats. So please get some merch. It all goes back to the same cause.
Wonderful. A true altruist. It's brilliant. Well, it's been absolutely delightful speaking with you. I'll hang up this call, but I'll stop the recording rather, but I won't hang up the call yet. But yeah, it's just thanks again so much for coming on the show, talking about your book and your experience and being so open with it and honest. That's one of the things we love on this show. People just being open and honest as much as they're comfortable doing. It's something that really helps others listening who are going through similar experiences and potentially need some guidance or just other opinions to really help them get through life, because there's no guide to life, unfortunately. There's just things we can kind of try to do. Yeah. So just thank you. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And, I love talking about this stuff, and I love spreading knowledge and helping however I can, helping people feel better. So thank you.
No worries at all.